She had been covering the Middle East for 3 decades when the question finally stopped her cold. It wasn't asked by a world leader or a general, but by a graduate student at Columbia University during a panel discussion on media coverage of Israel. Why? The young woman asked with genuine curiosity. Does Western journalism treat Israel like it's perpetually on the verge of either moral collapse or miraculous transformation? The veteran correspondent paused, realizing she had no adequate answer, because the truth was more uncomfortable than either narrative allowed. Everything we think we know about Israel is filtered through a Western lens that fundamentally misunderstands what they're actually looking at. The West sees Israel and thinks they're watching a familiar story: democracy under pressure, Western values in a hostile neighborhood, a small nation punching above its weight. But this is not the story Israel is living. This is not even close to the story Israel is living. The real Israel story is far more unsettling because it forces us to confront what the modern state actually is when survival becomes its organizing principle. Israel isn't an aberration in the international system. It's a preview. To understand why everything we think we know is wrong, she realized, you have to start with the most basic misunderstanding. The West looks at Israel and sees a country. Israel looks at itself and sees a machine. Not metaphorically, literally. A survival machine, engineered by trauma, refined by necessity, and optimized for one single function: ensuring that what happened to Jewish communities for 2,000 years never happens again. This is not ideology. This is not politics. This is engineering. The machine's architecture is visible everywhere once you know how to look. Take the Israeli education system. Western critics see militaristic indoctrination, but the machine sees something different: a population that must be psychologically prepared for permanent siege conditions. Every Israeli child learns not just history, but threat assessment. They don't just study geography, they study defensive terrain. This isn't happening by accident. It's systematic preparation for a future the machine has already calculated. Or consider Israel's approach to technology development. Western analysts marvel at the startup nation phenomenon, attributing it to cultural factors or educational advantages. But the machine's logic is more precise. Technological superiority is the only sustainable competitive advantage for a small state in a hostile environment. Every innovation, from Iron Dome to cybersecurity systems, serves the dual purpose of commercial success and strategic necessity. Consider how Israel makes decisions. Western observers analyze Israeli policy through the familiar frameworks of left versus right, hawk versus dove, religious versus secular. But these categories miss the deeper operating system. Every major Israeli decision, from settlement expansion to military operations to diplomatic strategy, is run through a single algorithm. Does this increase or decrease our probability of survival? The algorithm operates on multiple time horizons simultaneously. Short-term tactical decisions are evaluated against medium-term strategic implications, which are then tested against long-term existential calculations. This creates policy coherence that appears ruthlessly logical to supporters and coldly calculating to critics. Both assessments miss the point. The machine isn't designed to be moral or immoral. It's designed to work. The algorithm is ruthless in its logic. It considers threats on a 100-year timeline. It assumes the worst intentions from adversaries. It prioritizes capability over intention, preparation over hope, and most critically, It never, ever assumes that current peaceful conditions will persist. This creates what appears to outsiders as paranoia, but is actually a form of institutional PTSD translated into state policy. The machine is programmed by historical memory, not just the Holocaust, but centuries of expulsions, pogroms, and genocides. These aren't abstract historical lessons. They are design specifications. The West struggles to understand this because Western states weren't built this way. American security doctrine assumes geographical protection and superpower status. European security doctrine assumes multilateral institutions and peaceful neighbors. But Israel's security doctrine assumes none of these luxuries exist. It assumes it will always be outnumbered, always be surrounded, and always be one mistake away from extinction. This engineering approach produces behaviors that look insane to Western observers, but are perfectly logical within the system's parameters. Why does Israel maintain nuclear ambiguity? Because the machine calculates that explicit nuclear doctrine creates certain risks, while implicit capability provides maximum deterrent effect. Why does it build walls and barriers that seem to contradict democratic values? Because the machine has determined that physical separation reduces friction and therefore reduces the probability of escalation. The machine doesn't make moral calculations in the way Western democracies understand them. It makes survival calculations that sometimes align with Western moral frameworks and sometimes don't. This is what makes Israel so uncomfortable for Western observers to analyze. They keep looking for familiar moral categories and finding instrumental logic instead. But here's where the story becomes truly unsettling. The machine works by any measurable metric: economic growth, technological innovation, military effectiveness, population increase. Israel has achieved levels of success that should be impossible for a nation with its geographic constraints and security challenges. The survival machine has not only ensured survival, but created prosperity. This creates a profound cognitive dissonance for Western critics. They want to condemn the machine's methods, but they cannot dismiss its results. They want to argue that Israel's approach is morally bankrupt, but they cannot argue that it is strategically ineffective. So they find themselves in the awkward position of criticizing a system that works better than their own. And this is where everything we think we know becomes dangerous, because the West isn't just observing Israel's survival machine from the outside. They're beginning to build their own versions. Look at how Western democracies have responded to immigration, terrorism, and social media manipulation. Look at the rise of surveillance states, border walls, and algorithmic decision-making systems. Look at how quickly Western nations abandoned civil liberties frameworks when they felt genuinely threatened. The uncomfortable truth is that Israel isn't an aberration in how modern states behave under pressure. It's a laboratory. It's been stress testing the technologies, policies, and institutions that other nations now find themselves needing, as their own security environments become more complex and threatening. Israeli innovations in counterterrorism become American TSA procedures. Israeli approaches to urban warfare become NATO doctrine. Israeli methods of population control become European immigration policy. The machine's solutions spread because other nations discover they face similar engineering problems. This is why Israel makes Western liberals so uncomfortable. Not because it's foreign to Western values, but because it's a preview of what Western democracies might become when those values come under sufficient pressure. Israel is the mirror that shows what happens when survival logic overrides ideological consistency. The machine reveals the fundamental fragility of the moral frameworks Western democracies believe are permanent. It demonstrates that democratic values are not natural laws, but rather luxury items that require specific conditions to maintain. When those conditions disappear, the machine logic takes over. So everything we think we know about Israel is wrong because we're looking at the wrong story. We think we're analyzing a democracy in crisis. We're actually studying the future of the modern state. We think we're watching an exception to international norms. We're actually witnessing their evolution. The survival machine isn't Israel's problem. It's everyone's solution, waiting in the wings for the moment when conventional approaches stop working. The question isn't whether Israel's machine is moral or immoral. The question is whether it's inevitable. And that's the conversation the West isn't ready to have.